Hello children, in this class we will discuss value education lesson 2. Whatever God does is for the good. In our previous class we have discussed lesson 1. The value taught of this lesson is faith in God. So dear children, we should faith in God. At times you want something from God and pray for it, but you don't get it in return. Then what do? Do you question God or accept His decision? Read the story to find out more. So in this story we will discuss about believing God. Long ago there lived a king. He had many ministers. One of the ministers had a strong faith in God. He always said, whatever God does, it is for the good. He repeated this line frequently. Some people believed in it while some did not. So long ago there was a king, and the king had many ministers. Means the king had many staff. And among all the ministers, one of the ministers had a strong faith in God. And the minister who has faith in God, he always used to say, whatever God does, it is for the good. The minister used to repeat this line, that is, whatever God does, it is for the good. Anything happens, the minister used to say, whatever God does, it is for the good. He used to repeat this sentence again and again if anything happens. Some people believed in it while some did not. So some people believed the minister about whatever God does, it is for the good, but some of them did not. One day, king was having his breakfast. This minister came to the palace to discuss something. The king invited him to have breakfast with him. So one day, the king was having breakfast in the morning, and the minister who used to believe in God, who frequently used to say, whatever God does, it is for the good, that minister came to the palace to discuss something with the king. And the king invited the minister to have breakfast with him. The minister humbly agreed and sat down with the king at the breakfast table. So, when the king invited the minister who believed in God to the king's palace, the minister agreed to have breakfast with the king and sat down with the king at the breakfast table. Just then the king's finger got hurt and blood started trickling out. So when they started to have their breakfast, what happened? The king's finger got cut and blood started coming out from his finger. The king was in pain and shouted for help. When the king's finger got cut, the king started shouting. The king was in pain and the king shouted for help. The minister said, whatever God does is for the good. The king got angry and said, what is good in it? My finger is paining. So when the king's finger got cut, the king was shouting and asking for help. But what the minister who used to believe in God, what he said? The minister said, whatever God does is for the good. That means God did for his good. When the minister said to the king, whatever God does is for the good, the king got angry. The king got angry to the minister. And what he said? And the king said, what is good in it? My finger is paining. The angry king got up from the breakfast table and went away. So when the king's finger got cut, the king got angry to the minister and he went away from the breakfast table. In the afternoon, king decided to go for hunting. His ministers also accompanied him along with the soldiers. So, in the afternoon, the king decided to go for hunting along with his ministers. The king and his ministers went out to the forest for hunting along with his ministers and soldiers. The place where they went out for hunting, it was a thick forest. While hunting, the king lost his way and went the other side. He got separated from his soldiers. So when the king and his ministers along with the soldiers, when all of them together went out to the forest for hunting, the king lost his way and the king went the other side and the king was alone. Why the king was alone? Why he went the other side? Because the king lost his way. He became alone in the forest. He got separated from his soldiers and ministers. Soon some tribal living in the forest saw the king and caught him. So when the king got separated from his ministers and soldiers, what happened? Some tribal living in the forest, means some people who lives in the forest, they saw the king alone and caught him. They took him to their king. The tribal king looked at the king and said, "We have to please our goddess today. So we will have to sacrifice you." So when some of the tribal living in the forest saw the king, they caught him and took him to their king. And when they reached to their tribal king, the tribal king looked at the king and said, what the tribal king said? The tribal king said to the king, "We have to please our goddess today. So we will have to sacrifice you." So the tribal king said to the king who came for hunting, who got separated from his soldiers and ministers, what the tribal king said to him? The tribal king said that you will have to give your life. They said, "We will have to sacrifice you." The king pleaded that he is also the king and should be set free. And what the king replied to the tribal king? The king replied that I am also one of the king and you should leave me free. You should leave me. You should not sacrifice me. However, the tribal king did not listen to him. But even though when the king pleaded, when the king requested that he is also the king and he should not be killed, the tribal king did not listen to him, listen to the king. As the preparations were being made for the sacrifice, suddenly a tribal saw a big cut on king's finger. So when they started preparing for the sacrifice, for the king's sacrifice, what happened? Suddenly one of the tribal who lives in the forest, he saw a big cut on king's finger. He went to the tribal king and said, "We cannot give his sacrifice." When they started preparing for the sacrifice, suddenly what happened? One of the tribal, that is one of the person who lives in the forest, saw a big cut on king's finger and he went to the tribal king. He went to the king first and said to the king that we cannot give his sacrifice. There is a deep cut on his finger. Why the tribal told to the king that they cannot give his sacrifice? Because there was a deep cut on his finger, on the king's finger. who got separated from his soldiers. We cannot sacrifice somebody who is wounded, the tribal king said. Yes, you are right. So, when the tribal who live in forest, when he said to the king that we cannot sacrifice somebody who is wounded, the tribal king said, what the tribal king said? Yes, you are right. Set him free at once. So leave him, let him go away. And they decided to find another person for their sacrifice. The tribal king said, let's find another person. We cannot give his sacrifice as his finger is wounded. So let's find another person for sacrifice. So the king who lost his way was set free from the tribal king. Why? Because his finger got wounded. That is why the tribal king cannot sacrifice somebody who is wounded. When the tribal king let the king go away, the king came back to the palace and went straight to the minister. So the king came back to the palace. Why? Because the tribal king set him free. So as soon as he came back to the palace, he went straight to the minister who believed in God. And the king said, what the king said to the minister who believed in God? You were right. There was really a blessing hidden in the finger cut. Means the king believed that whatever God does is for the good. So when his finger got cut, it was for his own good. He believed God. So what the king said? He said, you were right, there was really a blessing hidden in the finger cut. Because of this finger cut, the tribal king set me free. He then narrated the whole story to minister. And what the king did? The king said the whole story, whatever happened in the forest, to the minister. And from that day onwards, the king too started believing that whatever God does is for the good. So from that day onwards, when the tribal king set the king free, he started believing God, that whatever God does is for the good. So dear children, the moral of this story is believe in the God's way. So we should believe in God. We must believe in God. Our faith should strengthen each day. If we will leave our problems to God, He would surely address them in His own way. So we must believe in God. We should strengthen our faith every day. Whatever problems we have, we can live for God. Why? Because God would surely address our problems in His own way. The solution would definitely prove God for us. So dear children, I hope you understood about this lesson. In our next class, we will discuss exercises of lesson 2. Thank you. Have a nice day.